This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thanks for joining us for this first edition of CBN NewsWatch for Wednesday, October 23rd. I'm Heather Sells. And today, while Washington focuses on impeachment, Republicans reveal the outlines of their plan for the top issue in next year's election, health care. Turkey won't start up its invasion in Syria again after its agreements with Russia and the U.S. But what will be the consequences of President Trump's move to pull out American troops? And a shocking story about what happens to the intact parts of unborn babies after an abortion. You may not believe what they're used for. And on a lighter note, our conversation with Hollywood mogul Tyler Perry will hear his story of faith, tragedy, and triumph. Those stories and more on today's Newswatch. Well, we begin with a top issue for Americans going into next year's elections, and that is health care. While Washington is gripped with impeachment fever, the Republicans unveiled the blueprint for their health care plan on Tuesday. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson brings us a first look and reports how the GOP says its plan doesn't resemble anything close to Democratic ideas of a government-run health care or Medicare for all.
Protect, empower, personalize.
That's the tagline.
For my father.
For my brother.
For my children, for my grandchildren.
Designed to focus on the individual, as the Republican plan promises quality, affordability, and choice.
Socialized medicine does not work.
Instead of a single-payer government system.
Healthcare is a right, not a privilege.
Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan would raise taxes on the middle class.
Will you raise taxes on the middle class to pay for it, yes or no?
So I have made clear what my principles are here.
A plan Senator Elizabeth Warren supports, but she's waffled on how to pay for it.
At least Bernie's being honest here and saying how he's going to pay for this and that taxes are going to go up. And I'm sorry, Elizabeth, but you have not said that, and I think we owe it to the American people to tell them where we're going to send the invoice.
California Democrat Ro Khanna is the co-chair of Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign.
But I do think you have to level with the American public of how you're going to pay for it.
In an interview with Faith Nation anchor Jenna Browder, Khanna told CBN News Medicare for All isn't free.
People will have to pay some premium.
The centerpiece of the GOP framework is protecting Americans with pre-existing conditions.
We want to protect pre-existing conditions by treating those who are self-employed the same way we treat those who get insurance through their job.
Republicans say reforming the tax code and increasing tax-free contributions to health savings accounts will help Americans create personalized, affordable care.
Our plan puts the patient and the physician back in control.
Louisiana Republican Mike Johnson says House Republicans are working in tandem with the president.
There'll be a lot of parallels between what we're proposing and what the administration ultimately presents.
Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
And turning now to the impeachment inquiry, the acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine says President Trump made nearly $400 million in aid contingent on the Ukrainian president looking into Joe Biden and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. And that is according to his prepared testimony. Bill Taylor says he was told that if the president of Ukraine did not announce he was launching the investigations, President Trump would not release the aid or agree to a White House meeting. The testimony also shows that Trump repeatedly told officials he wasn't after a quid pro quo, but established a trade between the U.S. aid and the investigations. The White House calls Taylor's testimony a triple hearsay. Meanwhile, the president is under fire for describing the impeachment inquiry as a lynching, but some have pointed out that several top congressional Democrats, including Joe Biden, called Bill Clinton's impeachment a lynching in 1998. Well, meanwhile, leading Democrats are growing increasingly worried about their own field of presidential candidates. Party leaders and activists see weaknesses in the top contenders. According to the Washington Post, Joe Biden has been on the defensive about ethical issues with his son, while Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are considered too far to the left to win a general election. And the New York Times reports that top Democrats are wondering if the weaknesses among the current leaders might open the door for another candidate to get into the race, although that is considered unlikely. Well, turning to the Middle East, Turkey will not resume its offensive against Kurdish fighters in northeast Syria. That's following agreements with the U.S. and Russia. Turkish President Erdogan and Russian President Putin struck a deal to end Turkey's invasion of northeast Syria. It's also a way to divide the spoils. As Chris Mitchell reports, the decision by President Trump to pull out U.S. forces is likely to have consequences far beyond the Middle East.
After their meeting, Presidents Erdogan and Putin set down new guidelines for northeast Syria.
The long-term stabilization of Syria, in general, can only be achieved, in our opinion, by observing Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
As of noon, October 23rd, within 150 hours, YPG terrorists and their weapons will be removed from 30 kilometers of the Turkish border, and the organization's fortifications and positions will be destroyed.
The deal also allows Turkey to control land it invaded, calls for joint Turkish-Russian patrols, and for the Syrian regime to fill the vacuum of Kurdish-held areas. The deal between Presidents Erdogan and Putin marked the end of an era in northeast Syria and a stunning shift in power to Russia.
It's crucial to note this is Russia, more than any other single country right now, that holds the whip hand in Syria. You know, Putin is effectively kind of the sheriff of Syria right now, and everybody is answerable to him. And that's a result of the rapid U.S. withdrawals taking place over the last week.
Syrian Kurds and others in northeast Syria felt betrayed by the U.S. decision and threw rock, shoes, and potatoes at U.S. forces as they left the area. President Trump compared the situation to a schoolyard fight.
It's like two kids in a playground. They fight, you let them fight for a minute, and then you pull them apart.
But the fight has left hundreds dead, hundreds of thousands displaced from their homes, and an historic geopolitical shift in the region. On Capitol Hill, both Democrats and Republicans tried to reassert U.S. presence in Syria. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell introduced a resolution opposing the U.S. pullout from Syria and warned the U.S. pullout benefits Russia, Assad, Iran, and ISIS.
A broader approach to America's position in the world, which I think, and 70 senators thought earlier this year, is more forward-leaning, certainly than the decision the administration had made with regard to getting our troops out of eastern Syria.
The pullout has resulted in a loss of U.S. credibility in the region.
We're just not sure how much we can rely on the United States now or in the future. That is a reality on the ground.
And Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. Chris, so much change in such a short amount of time. At this point today, what does all this mean for geopolitics in the region?
Well, Heather, the geopolitics has shifted dramatically. Just about 2 weeks ago, you were having joint Turkish-U.S. patrols. Now you're going to have joint Turkish-Russian patrols. And as that report said, really, Russia is the new sheriff in town and in northeast Syria. If you want to do anything there, you really have to go and talk to Vladimir Putin. The U.S. presence is nearly gone from there, not totally, but the U.S. presence in the Middle East is weakened. I think Israel is more vulnerable because of this. And, you know, those pictures of Kurds and Syrians throwing rotten tomatoes or shoes or rocks at the U.S. is very telling because, you know, you wonder right now, people are questioning, will anyone trust the United States anymore if they want to be an ally? I read an article recently about CIA operatives who are literally crying because they know that when they try to come in again to this region, who's going to be able to trust them? So geopolitics has changed dramatically here in just the last 2 weeks, Heather.
So, Chris, the U.S. Senate is considering this resolution, but do you think they can act in time to make a difference?
It's a great question, you know, Heather, because inherently legislation takes longer than the executive branch. The president can pick up his phone, order U.S. troops out or in within hours or even sooner. And but now it takes days for this legislation to come across. Mitch McConnell has this resolution, but it might take a few days to get that approved, and it has to be veto-proof so that President Trump can't veto it. Right now, you already have the boots on the ground, and who's going to be able to take the Russians, the Turks, the Syrian regime troops as well. Who's going to be able to say to them, well, we made a mistake, we want to come back? Right now, it does look like the United States is in eastern Syria, protecting what they say is some of the oil fields and a resurgence of ISIS. But it remains to be seen if the legislation right now on Capitol Hill can catch up to the events on the ground.
And Chris, what does all this mean for the new government in northeast Syria that I understand is called SANS?
It is called SANS, Heather, and that's the self-administration of northeast Syria. That is the autonomous area of northeast Syria for the last 7 or 8 years. We've had the opportunity to go up there and report on what's happening. Someone has described it as a tree of liberty. It really is a democratic government up there, and yet that future of that government, that tree of liberty, is really uncertain right now. I talked to one of the leaders last night, and he says, you would have found no better allies than the Kurds, the Christians and Arabs that had formed this government, and now the U.S. has pulled out, and really the future of that government is uncertain. One other thing he said to me that was really telling, he said, you know, as I mentioned, these U.S. soldiers are protecting the oil, and he says, well, is it okay for U.S. soldiers to die for oil but not for democracy? It really is a cutting statement, but it reflects the attitude of many of the people there, and they said they feel like the U.S. pullout has really been a disaster in that region.
All right, which is understandable. All right, Chris Mitchell reporting from Jerusalem. Thank you so much. And coming up, a shocking story about what happens after an abortion and how some of the intact body parts of unborn babies are used in ways that seem like something out of a science fiction story. And guess what? You're paying for it with your taxpayer dollars. We'll have that story when we come back.
Hey, if you're tired and exhausted all day, you can't think clearly, and you really just need a cup or even a pot of coffee to get through your day, then join me, Dr. Josh Axe, for this new series where I'm going to teach you how to transform your diet and use essential oils and supplements to get a better night's sleep.
Wake up to your best life. Call 1-800-700-7000 to get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
You know, I think as a father, it's my job, you know, to lead. Just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Pro-life advocates decry the hundreds of thousands of abortions performed in America every year. But the tragedy doesn't stop there. Intact parts of the child's body are in high demand among scientists. And as Jennifer Wishon explains in this alarming report, you may not believe it when you hear who is paying for their experiments.
Organs, bones, and other body parts of aborted babies are being sold and transplanted into lab animals. No, this is not a passage out of Frankenstein. These are real experiments happening now that taxpayers are funding.
It's abhorrent on so many levels.
Anthony Bellotti is president and founder of White Coat Waste Project, a group exposing experiments like this. Here are the reproductive tracts from aborted 13-week-old twin girls were stripped out and implanted into mice. Last year, the National Institutes of Health funded 200 similar studies across 50 institutions, mostly universities, in 33 states. This year, the NIH estimates it will spend $120 million tax dollars on research using aborted baby parts.
But this is a crisis now. This problem is growing in spite of Republicans, Democrats, pro-lifers, animal advocates. Nobody wants this.
Teresa Bukovac runs Pro-Life San Francisco. The bulk of the research happens in her backyard at the University of California, San Francisco.
One of the most infamous projects that was recently canceled by the Trump administration was a project that involved humanizing mice. And that project required 2 pristine, healthy fetuses between the ages of 18 and 24 weeks per month.
Nearly 70 members of Congress from both parties are working to expose these gruesome experiments. They've issued a letter demanding information from Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. You're asking him to indicate how many different babies were used in each project and the gestational ages of each. Can you believe that you're even having to write a letter like this?
It is deeply saddening to me that our own government would be a part of creating this marketplace for the buying and selling of baby parts.
In June, the Trump administration took steps to end human fetal research, but loopholes allow most of it to continue. In response, more than 90 research institutions wrote Secretary Azar to say fetal tissue remains an essential resource, crediting it for vaccines and potential treatments for ALS, spinal cord injuries, and Parkinson's disease. Opponents agree this is important research, but argue there are alternatives to human fetal tissue. Using it, they say, encourages late-term abortions, which produce more developed babies that are more lucrative when sold for research. That means abortion doctors receive incentives to use techniques that preserve babies and all their parts for science experiments.
So the only 2 ways they can do these abortions is through a live dismemberment or a medical induction, which, according to the Society of Family Planning, is very likely to produce born-alive infants.
To our core, to our founding, the recognition of the importance of life is who we are, and we can never get away from that.
Legislation has been introduced here on Capitol Hill that would prohibit the Secretary of Health and Human Services from authorizing any research that uses aborted baby parts. Research on stillbirth or miscarriage tissue would still be allowed. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
Still ahead, a more positive story, our interview with Hollywood mogul Tyler Perry about his story of faith, tragedy, and triumph. We'll have that right after this.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
Watch Dan and Dale tackle trending topics that test your faith on the next Faith Wire, Monday night at 9:30. The Global Lane takes you around the world, providing facts over fiction.
What might rising trade and geopolitical tensions mean for you on the home front?
With over 45 years of experience, award-winning journalist Gary Lane brings you the truth from a global angle.
What about the issue of immigration?
World news analysis you won't see anywhere else.
And it's all right here on the Global Lane.
Watch The Global Lane, Thursday night at 9:30.
Tyler Perry's sprawling new studio is home to a new project from comedian Steve Harvey. Harvey shared the news on social media but didn't give any specific details. Perry recently celebrated his new 330-acre facility, which was once a Confederate Army base. He sat down with Studio 5's Ephraim Graham to share his story of faith, tragedy, and triumph.
What is you ducking down for?
Hush, I'm trying to be incognito.
From Medea,
good Lord, who they came
to Old Man Joe, Tyler Perry wears many faces and hats. The actor, writer, and director is the first African American to own a major film and television studio.
You say you always knew that there was greater for you. Do you remember the moment you knew, or what happened that light went on for you?
I had a teacher, I said, you know, they were asking kids what they want to be, and I said, I want to be a millionaire. And he said, you're never going to make it because you're poor and you're black. But even as a child, there was something in me that said, that's not true, don't believe that. But I know now that was and is the voice of God.
And obviously that was critical in light of all that you were going to endure, that you needed to always know.
I had to know. And you know, the other part of it too is I thank God for my mother. I feel sorry for kids whose parents don't give them God, don't give them faith, don't give them Jesus, because life is going to get hard at some point and you will turn to something. Everyone turns to something. And I'm so glad I had the option, and I had a mother who was smart enough and strong enough or had the wherewithal and the faith enough to say, son, this is where you go, so that I'm not strung out on drugs. Because the things that I've been through, man, it's a wonder that I'm sitting here, but he is a wonder.
On the flip side, the other person's Emmett Perry. Your dad.
Yeah.
Because of him, what would you say your childhood was like, if you could describe it in one word?
Hell. Yeah, it was hell. It was hell. There's no other way to describe it, because he was, you know, I look at him now and I clearly think that there was so much trauma in his life that he may be mentally bipolar. I really think that something's there, but there were extreme highs and extreme lows and extreme alcohol abuse and extreme physical and verbal abuse, but was normal for him. I remember a few years ago, he sent a message to me through my brother, you know, because I was doing something and it had been successful or some project had come out. And he said, if I had beat you one more time, you would be Barack Obama. So he celebrates the fact that he did what he did. He thinks because of him being so brutal, I became this person. Which, in fact, there is some truth to the fact that he helped form who I am, because all things work together for your good. And somehow God turned that thing around to put me in this position to make it work for my good.
You escape New Orleans, you get to Atlanta, you don't find immediate success.
No, not at all. But I was successful in every moment. Looking back on it now, from this seat, I realized that, oh, this was all a part of it. I was working as a bill collector, you know, I hated the job. It's so negative, but you can't out-negotiate me in a contract because of that, you know? I was selling used cars to people. I was horrible at it because I didn't want to deceive people. But it helped me to be able to talk and speak and you know, negotiate back and forth. So all of those things helped me get to where I am.
Who are you? I'm deaf in a dress. Do you want to come get some?
How much of your success do you credit to Medea?
You know, it's been a tremendous part of it in the sense that it's a character that has a franchise that's worked really, really well. But there's so much more that's gone into it. You know, not just being on stage or being in front of the camera, but there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that it's kind of impossible to frame it all to that particular character. But yeah, she did a lot for it, for sure.
Will you ever hang her up?
Oh, I will hang her in a minute. Listen, she's on a hanger right now. When the minute people stop coming, you know, like this last movie, I said, minute people stop coming, she's gone. Well, it opens at #1. There you go.
Know.
Okay, here we go again.
How important is the church audience to you today?
Oh, very important, because you know what the thing I'm finding is that kids aren't going to church anymore. So if I can tell a story that gets them off guard a little bit, makes them laugh, and introduce them to God and to faith and believing, then that's important, because again, if you don't give your kids something, they're going to turn to something, and it may not be what you want them to.
So you have success, you've got wealth, you've got fame. What's driving you now?
Legacy. Legacy, my son. And what am I leaving? The new studio, it's all about going in that direction.
What a great interview. And for more uplifting stories like this one, be sure to tune into an all-new Studio 5 tonight. It will feature a preview of Kanye West's new film, Jesus is King. Studio 5 begins at 9:30 Eastern, only on the CBN News Channel. Coming up, a new drug could be coming to treat the early stages of Alzheimer's, but there's already something people can do that could cut their risk for the dreaded disease. We'll have that story when we come back.
Come home to the sounds of Southern Gospel from CBN Radio. You'll enjoy a rich Southern blend of bluegrass, classic gospel, and Southern gospel favorites like the Gaithers, the Crab Family, and bluegrass sounds like Mountain Faith. So make yourself at home with the all-new CBN Southern Gospel. Now available at cbnradio.com.
Meet the pastors who are preaching the gospel in a fresh, fearless way. I'm Roberto Torres-Cedillo. Join me each week for Next Gen Voices. And watch God transform a generation.
Prophecy thousands of years old.
We were called to be a light to the world.
Being fulfilled today. Discover how. Get to life. Call 1-800-700-7000.
We consider it our duty to reach out and help others around the world.
For a gift of $10 or more, you can own the acclaimed CBN documentary To Life. Just call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
To treat a human, no matter what he is, which religion he has, which color he is. This is what I'm doing.
See how the people of Israel are fulfilling prophecy.
History is being written, and I want to be a part of it.
By sharing their knowledge.
In Africa, in Asia, in South America, in East Europe.
And their love.
This is how we work. This is us.
Get to life. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
The pharmaceutical company Biogen says it will submit an experimental treatment for Alzheimer's to the Food and Drug Administration for approval. The company had previously stopped work on the drug, but then said a new analysis of its studies found that it can help patients in the early stages of Alzheimer's. But how effective the drug will be in practice remains to be seen. For now, there is one thing that experts say may help delay problems in the brain for those at risk of Alzheimer's or dementia, and that is exercise. Research from the University of Texas Southwestern found that exercising several times a week may delay deterioration in the brain. And that is it for this edition of CBN News Watch. Remember that you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, please tell us what you think about the stories that you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or just talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope that you'll join us next time. Have a great day.